everyone. This is Will. Welcome to Apple One-to-One training here on our show, our podcast. We're doing a little bit something different. We've been doing a lot of our training stuff the last couple of weeks. We've been doing our Black Friday, and I appreciate everyone checking out the channel, checking out everything that we've been doing and subscribing to our content. Akiti's here, and what makes her so special is that she worked with me at Apple, and we're going to describe a Apple experience that she had. She was a part-time specialist for how many years?
We have 5 years. 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah, I left right before the 5th.
Yeah, so she was here for 5 years, and the one thing is, and she'll attest to this when we go into our conversation, is that we always had really great relationships with everyone, whether it was in the specialist, genius, training, it doesn't matter. Everyone was really much like a family, and it's good to reconnect with a lot of people that can talk about the experiences from the old regime of Apple. You know, I can't speak on today's Apple. I haven't worked there in almost 5 years, which is a crazy thing to think about, and I want to learn a little bit more about your story about Apple, and you know what positive different experiences, and of course what's going on now in your life. So that's why we got together, and I'm really happy that you came aboard. I'd like to know your very first Apple product. What was the very first thing you recall ever owning as a user? Now I'm going to tell you mine. I had the iPod. I believe it was the fourth generation, the one with the click wheel. Was actually the menu and the pause and everything was in the click wheel itself. So that was the very first one I ever had for my product. So do you remember yours?
I learned how to use a computer in school on a Mac, the old school, like multicolored ones. But I think mine was the iPod as well, but it was the, I had at the same time, I got the big one, the iPod, like thick one.
The normal size, yeah.
Yeah. And then you had like the thinner minis that had
come the minis,
before,
yeah.
Before they went like super tiny, I had that version too. I had so many, but I had the big one and the skinnier version.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I went from a iPod 4th Gen 2, and then I got the Nano. And the one thing you learn about the Nano is when you play pool and you have the Nano in your pocket and you're leaning on the table, you're going to bend that thing. So and I found that out the hard way. So let's talk a little bit about your Apple experience, a little bit about like how you found the job opening, a little bit about how you got hired and part of that experience. So do you remember like the year or the date that happened?
So I was hired in fall of 2010, towards the end. I remember. I had actually applied in the summer because my best friend from high school had already started working there. And I was looking for a job. I needed, things like health insurance. I was in college. I needed, it was going to be like my fourth job, but I needed it. And Apple was one of the ones that for a part-time student, right? Sorry, full-time student, I needed a part-time job. My other ones, and it was one of the only ones that offered benefits and like a good salary. So, my best friend was like, just apply. I was like, okay, applied in the summer. I was also in a pageant. So I was like, one of the things I'm going to do is ask them for support in the pageant. And they hadn't responded to my interview. So this was like June of 2010 and they hadn't responded. And I was like, let me just drop in and be like, hey, support me. But also I've, applied and I haven't heard anything. And I talked to the managers and then I got an interview literally like 2 weeks after that. So yeah, it was like fall of that year.
And as far as, I mean, obviously you came in as a specialist, and that's pretty much how most people came in. You really didn't get many other roles at the time that were part-timers. Like there were no part-time geniuses, no part-time creatives, nothing like that. So really the only role you really could have done was a specialist on that side of it. Do you recall anything about that? Because the one thing that always was amazing to me is that people thought it was one of the more difficult jobs to get because they're looking for a certain something from a certain person, and not necessarily your Apple experience or what you know, but how you interact. And that's because that was probably the number one thing Apple cared about more than anything. Why do you think you were hired for this role?
I think you're right. I think it was that X factor per se, because I remember my interview very specifically. So it was a group interview, and the questions were definitely like, do you like Apple? The answer obviously needs to be yes. But also how much your technical aptitude was another one. So it was almost like aptitude, personality, plus something that brought something to the table for Apple as well. And I was already an entrepreneur as well as a passionate techie. So for that, like, it was like a good combination. And I already kind of had the X factor that I literally came to them like, hey, support me in pageantry. I had like a bubbly personality that kind of just helped me through that interview process. So I feel like it was definitely the combination of the three, because again, like you, I don't remember what the process is now. Like, I've gone to the stores and everything, but I'm not in the know, right? I was also a mentor, right? So I was a mentor at Apple for training, and that was a big factor. When we interviewed, we still looked for those three things. But again, I left back in 2013. And so that was a long time ago. So I don't know how they do it now, but we at that time were still looking for that personality, because like you're saying, customer experience was key. Right. You wanted someone that was personable.
And what was your overall like work day? What would you say, like, as a specialist, what was your typical day? And you mostly worked on the weekends because you were, I think, at school at the time, right? So you were a part-time employee. You were always a part-time employee, right? You never became full-time?
Yeah, I was always part-time. They wanted me to be full-time to go expert, right? Just because of my sales numbers. But I stayed specialist and part-time because of school, because I was doing extra credit. So I graduated in 3 years. And so that was my priority. So I was like, I really need the flexibility, but I'll make it work. So I was like, weekends and like one day in the week when needed. And then obviously we had to be there for all the holidays and, Black Friday and all of that.
Those are some of the craziest days, was Black Friday. I mean, you're talking literally getting there at 5 a.m. in the morning sometimes, because the mall would open at 6 back in the day. Luckily enough, that's something that doesn't happen too much more. Ever since COVID, honestly, that kind of changed a lot of things. And mostly people are online shopping now. So the role is really, as far as like getting that very early morning, very late. I mean, they still open late, I'm sure, like at 10 o'clock or something. But still, I mean, it was definitely different back in the day of us going into retail. The one thing that always like stood out for me with you specifically was the style you brought into the store. There's no doubt. Like, you always looked the best. You always got the heels on. You're probably wearing them now. Like, so, and you always brought a good positive attitude. Like, that was like the kind of people I liked being around, was just like someone who was fun, someone you want to hang out with, and we'll talk about the environment of the male and female, how that interacted. But that was like always a great thing to have in the store. That's the one thing that for me, always stood out about you, because I was always happy when you came in on the weekends, because that's the only time you came in. What was it like working with the people you were with, plus like your everyday tasks as a specialist?
Yeah. So, so many stories from the Black Fridays and all of that. Like, we had such a good time. And I think part of it was, like you said, like, we had a really good batch, right? Like, everyone was hired in batches. And so like the batches that we had at the time were so phenomenal, and we all got along so well. So day to day, I did work mostly weekends, and my schedule would vary, but I always tried for the 7 to 4. Because the 7 to 4 was my favorite, because you got there early. It was kind of chill in the morning. Our store was in the mall, Freehold Raceway Mall. It was one of the biggest, right, at the time. Still,
I don't know about biggest store. I was at busiest.
Like, traffic-wise. Yeah. Traffic-wise, it was one of the ones that made the most money on the East Coast, right? So we had like pretty good mornings, but like if you came earlier, you had the opportunity to like read up on the emails, on the new products. We would work with sometimes the marketing and the CX teams in Apple to like understand the new stuff. They had started that new when I was hired, where you'd get the iPad and you do different trainings and you learn more. So I would like to come in earlier and do that. So it'd be like, come in, grab a breakfast before you're, going in, because, the cafe is open in the mall, or Starbucks was open at the time. I don't even know if it's still there. But then you get in, kind of catch up on emails, catch up on what's new. We would have the like 10-minute daily sync with the team before you go out.
We always have for those we did like this thing in the morning where you would always have like a team meeting and stuff like that in the morning about some things. They started doing, after the time you were there, they did ones in the afternoon, because some people didn't always work in the morning, so they kind of did the same kind of recap in like the hallway, they would do that. So they made a little change on that. But yeah, they would do that. And then, but like what was interesting about specialists, I don't know if this was at the time, but like a lot of people didn't get fired at Apple. Like we had to do something pretty dumb. But even like your sales numbers were like not even as important as
Well, sales wasn't key, right? This is something that I will tell you that I'm a corporate employee now. I have been since I've left. And I always tell people that Apple was one of the best jobs that I could have gotten at the beginning of my career. Like, granted, I was an entrepreneur at 16 and I was working at Apple, 2010, I said. So around 19, 20 years old. So it was one of the best things I could have done because the amount that I learned about how you should run a company was so important. So like two things you mentioned, customer experience was key when you were interviewing, like that personality and how you'd be adding to that and bring to the store's personality was so important. The second part was sales wasn't the most important. Like, yes, you need to be able to sell as a specialist, but it was more about how you're having the conversation of what is it the customer is looking for from Apple. Because if you're coming into the store, you're going to buy something. You came with an intention. You didn't come there just to hang out. Some kids did because we were in a mall, but like that wasn't.
We had computers that free roam. You could do whatever you want on them.
Totally for that, right? We would, show them photo booth, all that. But it was about the experience, building the relationship. So that was way more important. So like when you got out on the floor, right, after like the daily sync of like what's important to know, what are goals? Of course, there are goals. But the conversation was more of, remember, this is the way that we approach customers. This is how we build the relationship. Bear that in mind. And then you go out with your personality. And the conversation isn't, what are you looking to buy? The conversation is, hey, I'm Akiti. Nice to meet you. Like, tell me a little bit about yourself, right? Like, that's your tagline. I still remember it.
Well, let's see. I'm going to test your knowledge right now, because what are the Apple steps of service?
That I don't remember. The acronym is like, I do remember the 3 A's a little bit, right?
All right.
Acknowledge, align,
and assure.
Assure.
Yeah.
Assure. I remember that.
Some things just don't leave your head, man. That's just me.
Because you know what it was? I was a specialist, but at that time, they also let you kind of sit and observe the other roles, right? So a lot of you and the team were in the family room, which is the bar area, the back part of the store. So I spent so much time with y'all to like understand the product more, understand how the service side of it actually worked. Right. And so that was really important there, the 3 A's. So that really stuck with me. And honestly, I've used that.
That's definitely a family room mentality, because the whole point of doing that is to understand that someone's coming in with anyone that comes to the Genius Bar is already a demoter. They're already somebody that is not happy. So you have to do those 3 A's in order to change the perspective. Your goal is not to change them from you're going from detractor to a promoter. That's the whole point of our role, where the only thing with you guys is simply just to make sure they're buying the right product and having a good experience doing it. Is there any story that you could recall of an interaction with somebody you remember to this day?
Oh my gosh. There's
because but if it's not positive, what about negative? Because that does happen quite a bit too.
I've had customers yell at me, and business managers have to come in and literally ask them to like step away physically from me, because our motto was, the customer experience is most important. So we were never in a position. I've never seen one of us get aggressive with an employee, with a customer. But the amount of customers that come at us in our face, wagging their fingers and like there's so many of those. I would say one of my favorite stories is actually, so we used to get a lot of foreign customers. And there's this one gentleman from England who had come. He was traveling. He's like, you know what? I've decided I really want to get I think he was getting a laptop. We had a printer deal with it. So you'd get the laptop, HP printer.
That was a thing back in the day. We used to give a printer deal.
Accessories. So like we used to ask them, what is it you're looking to do? So we could build that package for them. And this gentleman is like all ready to go. We're having good conversation. I've like identified like the 6 things he wanted, and it was time to pay. And we would pay, through our POS on our iPods. And This gentleman comes with a Ziploc bag of cash out of his jacket.
Wow.
Like literally, and not a baby Ziploc. I'm talking gallon-sized Ziploc of
Really?
wads
Like a
of
drug
cash.
deal Ziploc bag.
And I was like,
Wow.
sir, do you want to take this to the back? Because we had cash drawers built
Right.
into the
At the
tables
time. Yeah. Yep.
that we would use. But with that amount of cash, I was like, we're not doing this on the floor.
Right.
So I had to go to like the last table in the back and,
Mhm.
do your thing. And, I had to get a manager stand next to us. And, we have our security guards and I'm counting the cash. And like we had training.
Are we talking like singles or 20s here? Like, what are we talking like?
Combination. We had hundreds, 20s, and definitely some singles and fives.
Do you remember how much the total was? Because that's a lot of cash.
I want to say it was around 3,000 because we had gotten laptop accessories. I want to say the first gen iPads had also come out then. So like he really went for the full package.
Gotcha.
Normally, and if you went for a full package deal and you weren't going for the larger spends like the Mac Pros, you were around 3,000 at that time. So it was about that much. So it was a lot to count. And like when you have hundreds, like we were trained, you have to do the markers and make sure they're not counterfeit. And like, there's like such a process, but like what people don't realize is when you're in retail, yes, everything's digitized now, but you have to do those old school things. And like me being a mentor in the store, that was one of the things I was known for. Like I knew how to run a check, how to run cash, how to run whatever
Check was annoying. Check was one of the most annoying things. And then especially when the credit card machines would go down, we had to go the old school way. That was always a fun little experience sometimes.
Those are some of my favorites when the electricity in the mall would go out and all of a sudden you have to like literally manually get everyone out of the store. We have to make sure everything is functioning. And then when we're comfortable and secure, we would still open.
Not a lot of stores would do that. We were one of the stores that did. Is there any one experience that was like, oh my God, that person, or oh my God, something happened in the store that you saw that was just like something you always take with you that was like just a negative or a terrible experience?
As a terrible experience, there was
I could share thousands of them.
I know there's so many. I'm trying to pick. Like I'll tell you, one of my favorite stories to tell is during Sandy, when Hurricane Sandy came.
Yeah,
we were a lifeboat for people, right?
Yeah.
The mall.
So for those who don't know, Sandy happened around 2012, I believe 2012, and our store specifically was out for I believe a week. We had no power. I remember helping one of our own Apple employees to go get gas because it was not his time of the month. There was like that old system where based on your license plate, you were allowed to get gas based on that time. And I used my own car to get him there. But we were out for literally a week. I remember it wasn't, and then we had the snowstorm right after that played a role. And I had to go to the Apple store, I remember one day and did that. And that was the day I actually started doing GarageBand tracks. I don't know if you remember, but I used to start making random GarageBand tracks on computers because we were so dead during those snowstorms. I started making them, and if you remember Jay Polzer, he was always like thinks it was the funniest thing, me creating those things. But yeah, because it was so much fun though that one time. But yeah, I do recall that. What specifically about Sandy do you recall about that?
So we bonded a lot because we still had to work, right? Anybody who could make it in. I think my family was out for like 10 days. We didn't have electricity, but I could somehow make it in because I was only 5 minutes from the mall. The reason why I say we were a life raft for people was because anyone in the area that didn't have electricity, we had actually said to the mall, like, we are running. We have electricity. You can bring people
internet,
to plug in.
charge your stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so I remember the flood of people that would come throughout the day just to do that, to be able to work, do their schoolwork, whatever. But there was one lady that I'll never forget. She was a small business owner who owned a little shop on the pier on Jersey Shore for all of the yachts. So she actually ran that for a portion of the Jersey Shore, which means, for those who don't know, like she has the stall, but she owns a portion of the port where people would dock all of their boats and their yachts. And so Hurricane Sandy, being as bad as it was, obliterated the Jersey Shore, right? Like north to south, it was gone. But what happened to the boats in her port, they were all over the shore. Like she was so torn. She brought in her iMac, and it was like she was almost in tears because she was like she told us her whole story. She was like, when Hurricane Sandy happened, like I got boats on railroad tracks, I got boats in people's houses, I've got boats missing. And she was like, and I don't have my client information because it was on my computer. So like her whole livelihood was at risk. And that's why she came to us. So like, these are the kinds of stories that we would experience. And I'll never forget the way our experts were like, listen, like, we're going to take care of this. I was like, I need support on like what is possible here, because we don't know the extent of the water damage for her computer. And so taking it to the Genius Bar, having them take a look and like walking her through what's possible for recovery, what's not, and emotionally being there for them, it was like, that was a lot. Like, she'll always stay with me as someone that like the importance of what we did was so real in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, just a quicker story that I've kind of told before, but someone, Spring, who used to come to the Apple Store a lot for training sessions, she was a musician. I ended up becoming a Facebook friend with her, and she really was like one of the people from the one-to-one training program that really took to the stuff and really understood it and did some really creative things for it. Unfortunately, like a year or two ago, I found out she passed away from cancer, and it was and she didn't tell anybody about it, and it was really sad because I was really emotionally hurt from that, knowing that she was going through it. And just because I spent so much time with her, and she was like the perfect thing that Apple would have like really shown, like the growth of that. It was sad to see that happened to her. What an impact she has left on my life, and I'll never forget her. And that's the kind of thing you're talking about, where you have those connections like that. But all things come to an end when we work at Apple, because we're not working there anymore. But let's talk about the time frame of why you left Apple, and maybe some of the things about the job that really just didn't like make you want to stay there.
Yeah. I mean, those bad experiences you're mentioning were definitely some of them. My family wasn't really happy that I had those stories, right, of like aggressive people that would like literally threaten to.
Oh, if their phone dies, it's like the worst possible thing. It's worse than their kids dying. Like,
I had a gentleman who literally yelled at me for like 20 minutes, threatening to throw the phone at me if I didn't find a way to fix it. Right. So so there was definitely that. As much as there were those really great stories, there were those terrifying ones. But also, like, again, I was in college, right? So I was at the point of graduating. I was looking at my career path. And at the time, I wanted to be actually an international corporate lawyer for Apple, right? So I was one of the first that was speaking to corporate to see how we could do the internships. I think they started a little bit after I had left, actually. And so I was exploring that. I really thought about staying, but I'll be honest, when Steve Jobs passed away, I actually did feel there was a cultural change, right? So from my perspective, I felt that, and that made me question whether or not I wanted to stay any longer. But in that interim, in that deciding time frame, I actually decided, one, I wasn't going to go to law school. I'd taken the LSATs, did everything. And I was like, I learned at Apple that I'm way more creative than I should let go. You're not going to be creative in law, right? So I made that decision. And then I was like, maybe I could stay at Apple longer. And I was like, still exploring, applying, whatever. And then I got a job offer from BlackRock. And one of the things that really stood out for them was my Apple experience, right? So like I said, like Apple has opened up so many doors for me because I was able to show the plethora of skill sets that I had gained from there. And so they really wanted that. So I actually got a job from BlackRock as I was graduating, because again, like I graduated early. So let's see, Steve Jobs passed away, I think around the fall, and by February of the next year, I was out.
You're the first person I've ever talked to that thought that because of Steve's loss, I mean, he wasn't CEO he was no longer CEO for a couple of months before he passed. And, I remember people putting flowers at front of our doors when he died. Like there were literally like memorials in front of the Apple store the day after. And then we had that special thing where we closed the store for 3 hours for the Steve tribute. You weren't there; it was during the week, but it was basically we black sheet the entire Apple store. The Apple logo was turned off for a period of time on the store, so we turned that logo off, and then we had that special group thing. I don't know if you ever saw. I think they published it after on our private network, but it was really something that they did that for that, just to take away business for a couple hours, just to celebrate them. And I as far as culture wise, I mean, I didn't see it shift that as much as you did. It's more so, I think, more on the retail person who was running the show kind of did that more than Steve did. Yeah. I still think there are innovative products today. Like you could talk about your Apple Watch, or you could talk about your AirPods, which have nothing to do with Steve, but they still have that Apple style, that Apple look to them on there. And going back to my story, I left because they were just like, you're working on weekends all the time as a full-time person, and you want to do more, Monday through Friday job, and that's why I left. And I got an opportunity to go work at Sirius XM, and I took it. And I've been there. Like, how much higher could you possibly go in Apple retail? If you don't want to be a manager, what are you really going to strive for? Unless you get one of those internships you were talking about.
We saw a lot of our batch did go for those internships.
Yeah,
right. There was a lot of turnover. I think that's why culturally
they had experiences. They did like 6-month experiences, which they did offer.
And some people got the full-time jobs.
And some people work at Apple full-time because of those experiences now. Especially people I know. So
and I thought those were great, right? Like that's what I had talked. So this is the cultural change, right? So we had a clear separation of retail versus corporate when I had first started. Right? It was very, very.
Oh separate. Yeah, they were two separate, completely companies. Yes,
exactly. So we didn't get a lot of opportunities. I had been one of the first to like kind of push for it because I wanted to become an international corporate leader for Apple. So like I was like, hey, how do I do this? And so when we would do the trainings, I was in conversation with a lot of them. And so then a little bit after, they would offer the experiences where, like, depending on what your field of interest is in, you could go and experience that almost like a internal internship, which I thought was really cool. Mm-hmm. A lot of people did, right? Did get like, they loved writing. They were creative writers. They did that in college, but then they were working in retail. And to your point, wanted something different, did an experience on copywriting with Apple. And now they're corporate copywriters, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's so amazing that Apple did that. But where I think I saw the culture change was also, like I said, our batch was really great. And a lot of us were in that realm of like graduating college and like leaving Apple. Quite a few people left around the time that I did. So I feel like that was a part of it. I was one of the earlier ones, but like I started to already kind of feel the change and in how the approach was, right? I'm really big on quality. One of the reasons why I love Apple, like I'm on the laptop I bought as I was leaving, right? 2013, 15-inch Retina display. Like I went for the
you
best.
You got to upgrade. My goodness. Yeah. The 720p camera, man's killing me right now.
I know. But this is the thing about it. That was 11 years ago that I bought this laptop. And it's still
I have a 2012 MacBook right over here. I bought third party that still works fine, that I use the old software for. So
it works perfectly. I still have my first MacBook, right? I always wanted Macs. I was always a big fan. My parents had gotten it. I think it was for my like Sweet 16. I got my first MacBook and I still have it. I don't have a charger for it because I lost the original chargers and they don't sell those freely. You got to find them. But yeah, I love Apple for the quality. And so I also have started to see, like you're saying, like you have all the innovative things, but like the Apple Watch, I do have it. I'm wearing it, but I do see a quality difference, right? When we would do launches, everybody knows an Apple launch is huge. We know that. They're some of my favorite events, but like you do the Apple launch, and I know for a fact there's a period of time that Apple development gives for any issues to come up. When those bugs come up, it's normal. I'm a product manager now. So like I've become more familiar with their processes and, they leave time to fix things, get feedback from customers of like, how would they tweak it and things like that. Some things go into future generations. Some things are immediate fixes you have to fix within the 3 to 4 months post a launch. And that's not as efficient in my view anymore. Right? Whereas Steve Jobs was very particular. He was very, very particular on quality, right? You see a lot of his interviews, and we used to see some of his videos, right, when we were back at Apple.
Oh, yeah.
I never understood everyone feeling as though he was harsh. I found it more of he cared so much about the quality he was giving to customers, right? And I just don't feel that anymore. The quality overall, 100% on the computers for sure there, but I feel like there's like little things here and there where I'm like, Steve never would have allowed that.
It's definitely it's different because I'm not within the confines of the Apple environment anymore, so it's hard to say. I'm just an outsider now looking into it, and like Apple Silicon to me is one of the best inventions they ever came up with in the last 10 years. Like it has changed not only how computers run, but now every person's doing it. And realizing what Apple figured out 5 years ago is very impactful and could change how a computer functions, while Intel is falling behind and they're going down. As far as from a consumer standpoint, their chips are not going to stand up to what Apple's been doing lately. So, like to me, I thought when the Apple Silicon came out, that was one of the best inventions they came out with. So, like I said, there are bits and pieces where Apple Silicon is great. In fact, the failure rate of these computers are much smaller. So, geniuses are not as important anymore because there's not as many repairs anymore. Phones, on the other hand, it's a whole different story. But still, computer-wise, like it's almost like it's shifted to where the phone is almost more important than the computer, because the computer almost doesn't fail that often, from what I've been told from other people. But to kind of wrap things up, I want to know what you're doing now. Kind of talk about what you've been doing since your days at Apple, and anything you want to share regarding what you're behind today and all those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, after Apple, I was working at BlackRock for a few years. And so I was heavy in the retail space and finance, and, marketing overall. So marketing and CX is where I specialize, building and growing 360-degree customer experiences and next-gen technology. So I just kind of continued that path. But I did leave BlackRock for Verizon. So went from finance over to telecom, but in telco, it kind of brought me back to Apple, right? A lot of the same devices, a lot of the same conversations. But now as a product manager for 5G, I'm a director of 5G. I see the meat and bones behind what powers these, right? So like Apple builds the technology that we're on, like us being able to have this conversation. They've built the foundation of the device. But the network upon which this is running for us to be able to connect at a distance is what I work on, which is really fascinating to see how it all comes together. And we have great opportunities in this role for Apple to come directly to us and say, hey, we're thinking about this for the future. Work with us on building that technology. Things like eSIMs, right? We were the ones who worked with them to design because the SIM has to be built on the actual network, right? It has to work. That was a partnership on building that whole concept and growing that technology. So it's been a really nice journey of seeing all different aspects of the business. And then I'm actually leaving Verizon now. So leaving corporate America to continue my entrepreneurship. So like I said, before Apple, I was an entrepreneur, had my own company for interior design, event management, and fashion design. And like you said, I'm very big on my fashion. I'm going
to have her Instagram below, on this channel. Go check that out. Like it's part politics, part fashion, all at the same time.
Yeah, I'm a super nerd, so it's everything possible. But yeah, I love my fashion.
It's the best.
So I started my website, akitikoli.com. I think it was right before COVID had actually started. And so I kind of explored fashion, politics, like more so activism, like humanity is what I really focus on, and kind of how to show people that when I talk about a 360-degree experience for your life, that means a little bit of everything, right? Finding your passion, growing your passion, finding time for the things that you like to enjoy as your hobbies, and building your hobbies into businesses. So I talk a little bit about all of that. I do share my fashion and passion on that. share what we should be thinking about in terms of humanity. I'm actually growing it to soon eventually have a consultancy to help people do the same as I did, which is find my passion. And if corporate America isn't that for you, find your path towards that passion and designing your life around it. So that's really what I've been focusing on. So I'm really excited to give 100% to akitikoli.com and that brand. And, you know, I have always been a champion of love. So like I'm a lover of life, champion of love. That's what I promote. And just it's about finding, you know, what you love in this world and really chasing after it. And that's what I've done. So
that's awesome. I'm really glad to have this conversation with you and reconnect. And it's just been a real joy to see people who I used to work with and see what they've done in their lives and moving up and, you know, becoming adults now, you know, me becoming a family man, having like 3 jobs and, you know, it's crazy. And, you know, seeing where, you know, because I've seen a lot of the things go on in your life and how you've overcome a lot of things. And it's really great to see you're still smiling, still looking beautiful, and you're still wearing the heels, and it's perfect. So it's absolutely great. And that you're going forward in, you know, what you're pursuing. And I'm hoping, hey, you know what, down the line, if you become like a 1 million subscriber and, you know, hopefully we had a little part in helping you out of that. But I appreciate you coming on to the podcast talking today with us. I really do appreciate it. And I hope that we continue to talk again and keep in touch. And like I said, I promised you the next time there's a wedding, only 5 minutes away from your area, you are invited to come. I'll tell the bride and group.
I would be excited. It's always good to reconnect. I'm so glad that we've stayed connected after all these years. So thank you so much. This was a ton of fun. And yes, we'll see where everything goes. So
all right. And thank you everyone for listening to this podcast. We do appreciate it. We don't do these all the time, but it's great to have them. There'll be an audio version of this that you can download as well if you want to listen to it. But I appreciate everyone. And as I always say at the end of every podcast, I love every single one of you.